One of the biggest mistakes business owners make is believing they have plenty of time. They assume they'll think about residency when they're ready to leave. They'll think about structuring when they're ready to move. They'll think about international planning when the business is restructured or sold. And they'll think about evidence when someone asks for it. On the surface, that sounds reasonable, but that assumption can become incredibly expensive because one of the most important lessons I've learned working with business owners over many years is this. The best time to start planning is almost never when you're ready. In fact, that's often the worst time. Hi, I'm Vina White, CEO of WellSafe. In episode 1, I discussed why more business owners are quietly creating exit options. In episode 2, I discussed why more business owners are looking beyond Australia and creating international flexibility. Today, I want to talk about something that determines whether those plans succeed or fail, and that's timing. Because in my experience, timing often matters more than the structure itself, more than the country itself, and sometimes even more than the tax outcome itself. One of the most common assumptions I hear sounds something like this. I'm not leaving for another year or two, so I don't need to think about this yet. Or I'll deal with all of that once I've decided where I'm moving. Or we'll sort it out closer to the time. Those assumptions sound logical, but they're often the beginning of the problem because residency planning is not an event, it's a process. And successful international transitions are usually built months or years before anyone boards a plane, not afterwards. Most people think relocation starts with a flight. It doesn't. Most people think residency starts when they arrive somewhere else. It doesn't. Most people think evidence starts when the ATO asks for it. It doesn't. The reality is very different. Your future position is often influenced by decisions made long before you leave. How you structure your affairs, how you organize your business, how you manage your personal arrangements, how you create evidence, how you establish your intentions, how you sequence decisions. These things don't happen overnight. They happen over time. And time is often the one thing people leave themselves too little of. Recently, I spoke with a business owner who planned to relocate overseas in a couple of years. He believed he had plenty of time. But once we reviewed his circumstances, it became clear that several important decisions needed to be made well before his intended departure. Not because the strategy was wrong, but because some opportunities become more difficult once the business grows, the structure becomes more complex, and the value of the assets increases. That's something we see repeatedly. Timing doesn't just influence the outcome, it often determines which options are still available. This is where business owners get caught, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because they're reacting rather than preparing. Every year you wait, the business grows, the shares become more valuable, the complexity increases, family circumstances evolve, the evidence becomes harder to establish. The number of moving parts increases, and suddenly something that could have been relatively straightforward becomes significantly more difficult. The opportunity wasn't lost because the strategy was wrong. The opportunity was lost because the timing was wrong. And that's a very important distinction. The most successful business owners I work with don't wait for certainty. They prepare before certainty exists. They don't need to know exactly where they'll be living in 3 years. They simply know they want flexibility, so they start creating it. They begin understanding their options, they begin understanding their exposure, they begin understanding how residency works. They begin understanding what evidence may be required. They begin understanding how different decisions may affect future outcomes. Not because they have all the answers, but because preparation creates choices, and choices creates flexibility. One of the biggest misunderstandings around international planning is the belief that evidence can be created later. It usually can't. Evidence is created by how you live, it's created by your actions, it's created by your behavior, it's created by your decisions, and most importantly, it's created over time. This is why sophisticated planning often starts well before any major move occurs, because evidence is not something you manufacture at the end, it's something you accumulate throughout the journey. And that's a very different mindset. There are generally two types of business owners: the reactive business owner and the strategic business owner. The reactive business owner waits until a problem appears. The strategic business owner prepares before the problem exists. The reactive business owner waits until the sale is approaching. The strategic business owner prepares years beforehand. The reactive business owner waits until they feel pressure. The strategic business owner creates options before pressure exists. And when you look at the outcomes over the long term, the difference can be enormous because preparation creates flexibility, while pressure removes flexibility. The most sophisticated business owners understand something many people miss. They understand that timing is an asset, just like capital, just like knowledge, just like opportunity. The earlier you begin preparing, the more options are usually available. The more time you have, the more flexibility you have. The more flexibility you have, the better decisions you can make. And the better decisions you can make, the better outcomes you're likely to achieve. This principle applies to almost every area of business, and it applies equally to international planning. So perhaps the question isn't, when am I leaving? Perhaps the better question is, when should I start planning? Because those are two completely different questions and they produce very different outcomes. One assumes planning starts at the end. The other recognizes planning starts long before the end. And that's where many of the best outcomes are created. One of the biggest mistakes business owners make is waiting until they're ready, because readiness is often the point where flexibility begins disappearing. The business owners who usually achieve the strongest outcomes aren't necessarily the smartest, they're not necessarily the wealthiest, and they're not necessarily the most sophisticated. They simply started earlier. The biggest advantage wasn't intelligence, it wasn't wealth, it wasn't luck, it was time, because time creates options. And once time disappears, so do many of your best options. I'm Vina White from WellSafe. In the next episode, we're going to look at why structure matters more than ever and why many business owners are discovering that the structure which got them here may not be the structure that gets them where they want to go next. I'll see you in the next episode.